Is it good or is it bad? There was once a man who lived in a small cottage with his wife and son. Their prized possession was a gorgeous Arabian mare. Now his neighbors told him how lucky he was to have such a beautiful mare. But he said he did not know if it was good or bad. He just knew he owned a beautiful mare. Now one night the mare broke out of the corral and ran away. The man's neighbor said it was terrible luck. But the man said he didn't know if it was good or bad. All he knew was that his mare was gone. Now the very next day the mare returned with 7 beautiful Arabian stallions with her. Now all the neighbors told him how lucky he was, but he said he did not know if it was good or bad. He just knew his mare was back with 7 beautiful stallions. Now the man's son decided to break one of the stallions, but he was thrown from the horse and he broke his leg. The neighbors told the man what bad luck that happened to his son. But the man said he did not know if it was good or bad. All he knew was that his son had a broken leg. Now about this time the king sent his men through the land, enlisting all the able-bodied men to join his army and go to war. However, they did not take the man's son because he had a broken leg. The neighbors told the man how lucky he was because his son did not have to go to war. But the man said he didn't know if it was good or bad. He just knew that his son's leg was broken and he could not go to war. So is something good or is something bad? Isn't it tempting for us to just automatically label something based upon the immediate circumstances as either being good or being bad? But now be honest and think about it. Is this always the case? Has this always been the case in your life? Can you think of a time where you label something as bad, but later it turned out to be pretty good? Or maybe something happened that you thought was really good, but later, well, it just turned out to be something bad. Well, today is the day we have been waiting for in our study of the Red Sea rules. In fact, we've had to wait 8 long weeks. Today, Israel is finally delivered from their Red Sea crisis. Today, we watch the waters part and Israel be delivered. Let's read the story, Exodus chapter 14, verses 21 and 22. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. Amazing story. Instead of looking at a sea of red, Israel finally sees the blue sky between the parted waters. So here in this auditorium, the wall behind me has been red for 8 weeks, symbolizing that wall of Red Sea trapping the Israelites. Well, today we finally have blue in the middle, a symbol of the blue sky of Israel's deliverance. Now, honestly, who would have ever guessed? Who would have guessed in a million years the unique way God would choose to deliver his people? And yet, God did it his own way, which leads us to Red Sea rule number 8. And that is, trust God to deliver in his own unique way. We have to remember, our God is a very creative God. He does not use a cookie-cutter method of delivering us from our Red Sea crises. No. He has a way of delivering us, yes, but always in his own unique way. Now, we may not always like the way he delivers, but you have to admit It definitely keeps life interesting. Now, today, I want us to look at a person who learned and actually lived out Red Sea Rule number 8. He lived it out the hard way, but he lived to tell about it. His name is Joseph. Now, you may remember Joseph. You may have read his story in the Old Testament, or maybe you caught his Broadway musical, the guy with the beautiful robe. The Bible tells the amazing story of this guy who endured unbelievable cruelty, unfair hardship, unjust treatment. I mean, the guy's, his middle name should have been Raw Deal. Everywhere along the way, he got a raw deal. And yet, what impresses me is that through it all, Joseph has this way of just keeping his faith centered in God. No matter what the circumstances he faced, no matter what came his way, he just had an amazing way of staying focused, and he just kept trusting God, not just at the end of the journey, but all the way through the difficult journey. Now, what lessons can we learn today from this fellow named Joseph? And what can we learn from his Red Sea crises, plural? He had more than one. What can we learn that can help us really learn to trust God to deliver us in God's own unique way? Well, two big challenges. Here's challenge number one. You ready? Let's get this in our notes. Trust God before the deliverance. Before the deliverance. Now, from a human perspective, Joseph, as I said, got a raw deal for roughly 13 years, from the age 17 to around 30, raw deal one after another. He had been the victim of unbelievable cruelty by his brothers. Can you imagine, who sold their 17-year-old brother into slavery? Then, years later, he is falsely accused of attempted rape by Potiphar's wife. Then, if you remember the story, he is unjustly imprisoned for that. And then he interprets a couple of dreams for the baker and the cupbearer, and the cupbearer is released. And the cupbearer says, "Oh, Joseph, don't worry, man, I'll remember you when I get out of prison." Well, he forgets. Not for a week, not for a month, but for 2 long years. So let me ask you, in what kind of condition do you think your faith in God would have been if you had endured what Joseph had to endure? It's impressive. Somehow, Joseph did not lose his faith in God. Now, how do we know this? Because before God delivers Joseph from his horribly unfair circumstances, we're going to watch how Joseph still had his faith in God. And the story is told in Genesis chapter 41. Now, let me give a little background here. Joseph is in prison, and Pharaoh has a couple of troubling dreams. The cupbearer says, "Oh, I just remembered I had an old buddy in jail who interprets dreams." So Pharaoh calls Joseph out of prison into the palace to interpret his dreams. In the conversation between Pharaoh and Joseph, this is where we see how God gets all the credit. Now, let's just drop into the story 4 key verses. All right, you ready? Genesis 41, verse 16. Pharaoh says, "Hey, can you interpret my dreams?" And here's the response. "I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Pharaoh. "But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Drop down to the next one, 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed," there it is again, "God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do." Okay, drop down to verse 28. Still in this conversation, Joseph says, "It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do." And then drop down to verse 32. Here we see it again. Joseph says, "The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon." Amazing. As he interprets this dream, he gives God all the credit. Now, here's the question. How did that impact other people? I want you to notice two positive impacts that Joseph's faith in God has on other people. First of all, on Pharaoh, the unbeliever. Remember, Pharaoh's not a Jew. He doesn't believe in God. And yet, watch, at the end of this conversation, Joseph actually has Pharaoh talking about God. Let's read chapter 41, verse 39. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, isn't that amazing? Here this unbeliever's talking about God. There is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. What an incredible impact Joseph's faith in God in one conversation had on the unbeliever Pharaoh. But secondly, look at the positive impact Joseph's faith in God had on a starving world. Remember, this famine hit the whole world, and people are in desperate need when this thing happens. Look what occurs in chapter 41, verse 56. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened up all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. But now watch it grow. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. Joseph's faith in God not only impacted Pharaoh, the unbeliever, but ended up saving that whole area of the world from starvation. So, what's the lesson we need to know? Let's write this in our notes. We need to realize that our human perspective is not always correct. It is not always correct. I hate to break the news to you, but you're not always right. I know some of you ladies, you think you married Mr. Right, only to discover he just thought he was Mr. Right. No. We all make mistakes. None of us have it correct all the time. Why? Because our understanding is limited as human beings. It's often controlled by seeing only the immediate situation. It can be controlled by our feelings, our emotions, our circumstances, what we had for supper last night. A lot of things can influence us. What at the moment you see may appear to be bad, in Joseph's case, ended up being pieces of the puzzle to turn out something very, very good. Now let me illustrate this. Let's imagine for a moment that here at the bottom of the stage there is an ant. And the ant's goal is to go from here to the sound booth in the back of the auditorium. Now, that ant with his limited perspective looking ahead says, you know what? The easiest part of my journey, the safest part of my journey is going to be between the step down here and the first row of chairs. Because it's clear sailing, nothing in my way. He thinks that's going to be his safest part. The only problem is that ant doesn't know about communion. He doesn't realize that when we have communion, people are going to be filing by. He's going to be stepped on. This is the most dangerous part of his journey, though he thinks it's going to be his safest. Ironically, he thinks if I could just make it to the chairs, all I have to do is, wait, now there's legs, there's feet, shoes, there's purses, coffee cups I've got to dodge. By the way, you need to clean up around your place before you leave. Your mother doesn't work here. So on his way back, he thinks, this is dangerous. I got to dodge all these things. In reality, that's the safest part of his journey, because he's actually being protected by the things he's having to endure and go around. Do you realize it is the same with us as humans? We just have limited vision, limited perspective, and because of that, our conclusions are not always going to be correct. Could it be this is why God reminds us in Isaiah 55:8 this great truth? My thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways. So, what's the lesson from this first challenge? We don't have to wait until after we're delivered, look in the rearview mirror and have 20/20 hindsight and say, wow, look what God did. Look how God delivered me. No, you don't have to wait till that. You can actually trust God before the deliverance because God has proven himself for thousands of years to be trustworthy. You can actually have, instead of 20/20 hindsight, you can even have, before the deliverance, 20/20 faith sight. You can have faith in God that he will work in all things and will deliver you. So, trust God when? Before the deliverance. All right, here's the second great challenge we learned from the life of Joseph. We need to trust God after the deliverance. Now, let's get back to Joseph. How would you have responded to the request to interpret Pharaoh's dream? Had you been Joseph with your track record, do you think Joseph might have said to himself, oh no, I'm done interpreting dreams. Bad stuff happens every time I interpret a dream. I'm 17 years old. I tell my brothers about this dream. They sell me into slavery. I'm in prison. I tell the cupbearer about this dream, and he says he's going to remember me. He forgets me. Every time I dream something, bad stuff happens. I'm not going to interpret any more dreams. Or he could have said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh, I'm sorry, but this dream interpretation thing, it's not an exact science. I don't think I can help you out. I don't understand what this one's all about. He could have responded in that way. Something else. Once he interprets Pharaoh's dream, now think about it, and once he is put second in command over all of Egypt, how many of you would have had to come to Jesus' meeting with that cupbearer, the forgetful guy? Yeah, I think I would have taken a little revenge there. Or sometime later when his deadbeat brothers finally show up and they're begging for food, but they don't recognize their old brother, do you think that would have been a great time for Joseph to get even? Man, those guys had it coming. All right, what was Joseph's faith in God? What did it look like after the deliverance? Well, Genesis 45, verse 3 following tells us, listen. Joseph said to his brothers, this is when he reveals his identity. I'm Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. You think? I think they would be terrified at his presence. But then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land. And for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead. There it is the second time. God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, Lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Again, Joseph impresses me because he continued to trust God even after the deliverance. In spite of all the pain, injustice, unfair treatment, we see this guy with a forgiving heart, with a servant heart. Notice he demonstrated great love and great compassion. First of all, to Pharaoh, by interpreting his dream to save his nation. Great compassion to the cupbearer by not removing his head. A great compassion to his brothers by not having them executed. How in the world Think about it. How in the world was Joseph able to respond in this way? Somehow, somewhere along the way, he had learned Red Sea rule number 8. He had learned to trust God to deliver in his own unique way. By the way, as a little side note in your notes, we see a powerful demonstration of Joseph's mature faith in the naming of his 2 sons. Back in Genesis 41, he has 2 sons during this whole process. First of all is Manasseh. Do you know what Manasseh means? It means forgets. He named his son Forgets, so that he would always remember, quote, God has made me forget all my trouble. His second son, Ephraim. You know what Ephraim means? It means twice fruitful. Twice fruitful. Or the way Joseph says it, God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. It sounds to me like Joseph has let God heal all that pain, all that unfair treatment in his past. You see, Red Sea rule will do that for you. Number 8, Red Sea rule number 8, it'll do that for all of us. It will give you a healthy perspective on life. It will prevent you from growing up to be an old grumpy, grouchy person. By the way, we have enough grumpy, grouchy people in our culture today. We don't need any more. How do you grow old gracefully, not grumpy? Well, let's just fast forward to the very end of Joseph's story in Genesis 50. Listen to this grace-filled man beginning in verse 18. His brothers then came, and by the way, this is after Jacob, daddy, dies. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him, before Joseph. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. What's the message? We have to learn to trust God. Let our faith in God mature to the point that we don't just trust God after, but we trust God before. So we trust God before the deliverance, and then after we maintain our faith in God, not seeking revenge, not becoming bitter and resentful, and trying to get even with people who hurt us in the past. No, just letting that go and moving on to a healthy walk with God. Now I want you to imagine with me for a moment. Imagine a bride. And imagine this bride walks into a wedding dress store, all excited about picking out that perfect dress for her wedding. As she enters the store, she sees a large sign, and on that large sign are printed these words: one size fits all. Now, you tell me, how excited is that bride going to be about that store? How long do you think it's going to take that bride to turn and get out of that store? All right, let's imagine that same bride walking into a different store. And she walks into this bridal store, and she says, I'm here to buy a wedding dress. And she looks up and she sees a large sign. And that large sign reads, wedding dresses professionally tailored to fit perfectly. Now, how is that bride going to respond? She's going to say, Daddy, hand me your credit card. Yeah, she's ready to buy. She wants that dress to fit perfectly. Can we understand that when God delivers us from a Red Sea crisis, whatever it may be, God promises to deliver, but not in a one-size-fits-all approach. God will deliver, but He will do it in His own way, in His own time, using His own methods. That means the challenge for you and me is to learn to trust Him before the deliverance and after the deliverance. Joseph found the secret to the successful life, no matter what life threw at him. So, was it something good or was it something bad? Well, for Joseph, that is not the ultimate question. The ultimate question for Joseph and for us is this: am I willing to trust God to deliver me in His own unique way? If God is in control of our lives, we know that He is working in all things for good. This means that we can look at whatever life throws at us, whether we think it good or bad in the immediate moment, and we can say, God is good, God is in control, and God will deliver in His own unique way. I like to remember it this way: my life is but a weaving between my Lord and me. I may not choose the colors. He knows what they should be. For He can view the pattern upon the upper side, while I can see it only on the underside. Now, sometimes He weaves in sorrow, which seems so strange to me, but I will trust His judgment and work on faithfully. 'Tis He who fills the shuttle. He knows just what is best. So I shall weave in earnest and leave with Him the rest. Not till the loom is silent and the shuttle cease to fly shall God unroll the canvas and explain the reason why. The dark threads are as needful in the weaver's skillful hand as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern He has planned. Red Sea rule number 8. Trust God to deliver in His own unique way. Let's bow. Father, we thank You for the life of Joseph. Thank You for the lessons that he teaches us, not just with his words, but with his actions. Father, may we learn to trust You before and after the deliverance. And may we know that You work in all things for good. May we trust You to deliver us in Your own unique way. This is our prayer through Christ. Amen.